Australia is getting its first bout of proper inflation in 40 years. Inflation measures the cost of living, and while the official stats aren't fully showing it yet, most of the everyday things we buy are starting to get more expensive.
The cost of living at the moment is absolutely exorbitant.
When there's been high inflation overseas, there's been high inflation in Australia.
Groceries that 2 years ago would cost me around $100 a week and now around $140 to $150 a week.
The pressure on household budgets is made worse by the unprecedented amount of debt we're in, and wages growth is still slow. It looks like we're now entering a new era of high inflation, and the economic rules we've gotten used to are being rewritten.
I think the time for sort of widespread spending without considering the consequences is very much over.
Inflation is simply rising prices calculated by statisticians using a basket of things that you and I normally buy. Before Russia invaded Ukraine, economists were arguing about whether the burst of global inflation caused by the pandemic would be temporary or more lasting. But the surge in commodity prices, especially oil, is reminding us of the two oil shocks of the 1970s and the so-called Great Inflation that resulted.
There is now probably no commodity more crucial than oil.
And now there are calls to cut the petrol excise tax, which was actually introduced by the then Treasurer John Howard in 1978 during those oil shocks. 3.5 cents a litre it was then, taking the price to 21 cents. Those were the days, but petrol is still fundamental and it still really hurts and flows through to everything.
I always like to use the analogy that ballooning is like a metaphor for my life, which is that I just blow with the wind. Destination unknown.
We're going to start the inflation process.
After 315 days affected by restrictions, Kif Saunders' ballooning business is coming out of the pandemic into a turbulent economy.
So running a small business, every dollar counts. And so any rising cost is going to have an impact in our business. Fuel's now nearly $2 a litre. Of course this is going to have a massive impact. Price of gas, price of insurance. Costs are going up. In a really volatile consumer market, it's very tricky to take that brave step to be raising your prices. We still haven't had a great chance to be able to determine what that price point is to meet the rising costs that we're currently experiencing, given the current economic situation. At this stage, we have a far bigger kind of, objective, which is just survival.
Like many small business owners, he wants to raise wages, but it's tricky timing.
I owe these people a lot in the sense of what they have given to this company and to me. And they're friends. The cost of living is going up and they deserve it. But obviously, running a business, it still comes down to the fact that people accept that you're going to have to pass this on because, you can't absorb all of these costs. Now, I've completely accepted that if this business breaks even over the next year, then that's actually a great result. And so these times, they're tough. But, it is destination unknown, and I'm happy to roll with that.
As costs continue to increase, people are looking to save. Down at Queen Victoria Market, consumers are cutting out the middleman and buying direct from suppliers. But even their costs are going up. Con, what sort of wholesale price increases have you seen?
Quite substantial, I've got to say. We're looking around about 20%.
Do you have to absorb these price increases or are you passing them on?
Up until now, we've certainly absorbed them, but we can only hold on for so long.
And what are the costs you're seeing going up the most?
Well, the cost of getting product here is a huge factor.
There's a transport.
Transport, yeah. Everything has gone up.
Inflation last year was 3.5%, which might sound okay, except that wages increased by 2.1%. Also, it depends what you buy. Vegetables increased by 6.1%. Beef and veal prices increased by 8.1%. Oils and fats, 5.4%. And automotive fuel, 32.3%. Everybody's inflation is different.
We've seen global demand for goods and services rise post-pandemic. You know, households were locked away, couldn't spend money, we saved a lot, we've come out spending. But when demand outstrips supply, issues start to emerge. 50% of businesses reported that supply-side shortages are impacting their businesses, and 40% of those said that increased prices as a response.
The cost to move our product to our retailers has gone up significantly, and we're also seeing wheat prices go up. You know, it's the last resort that we push our prices up to our consumers. But on baked beans and spaghetti, canned tomatoes and canned fruit, we expect prices of over 10% on shelf to be going up, unfortunately, in about 12 weeks' time.
Former Australia Post CEO Christine Holgate now heads logistics network Toll Global.
By far, fuel prices are a massive cost for us. So if those fuel prices do start to surge, like they're predicted to do so, that will be passed on. Here in Australia, we've had 3 months of terrible weather, and that's impacted rail, it's impacted roads, and of course air. And undoubtedly, the costs have gone up.
What do you think the impact of higher inflation is going to be?
My biggest concern at the impact of inflation is the increase in poverty that could follow.
I'm an enrolled nurse. After tax, I get about $1,900 in my hand. I haven't been able to continue to keep up with the cost of living, regardless of working full-time. I work weekends as well, and it still doesn't cover everything that I need.
Single mother Julie Marie hasn't seen her pay rise in real terms for 4 years due to a historic public sector wage freeze in WA. The state government is set to scrap the wage cap, but that's not helping Julie yet.
My expenses here in this house have actually gone up about $300 a fortnight over the last 12 to 18 months. I haven't actually bought my children's school clothes this year at all. Somehow I have to be able to afford to buy them an entire new winter wardrobe. My children have ADHD and they've also got ASD. 2 days ago I had to pay $125 for 3 scripts for them. My biggest worry really is just not being able to afford to continue paying rent. There is no getting ahead without a pay rise. The government should be able to give us enough money to be able to survive on. Give us a decent pay rise that actually works in this world today. So I'm terrified of what's going to happen.
Wages haven't been rising for years. They're starting to now, but not fast enough. And price inflation without income inflation means most people fall behind. Now, the way to get wages up is by driving unemployment down, which is now largely happening because immigration disappeared during the pandemic.
In terms of inequality and who's going to be impacted by rising inflation, it is going to be low-income households and it's going to be households on fixed incomes. That goes up, I think, to a structural issue with the wages setting in Australia. We saw that coming into the pandemic. We had 10 years of really low wages growth, despite strong economic growth. And we're seeing now coming out of the pandemic, those wages just aren't coming back, the strength that we would expect, particularly with unemployment where it is.
Will wages growth be enough?
Wages growth will go up and inflation is going up, but our view is that in the short run, inflation is going to be higher than wages growth. And that means that for a lot of workers, they're going to experience a real pay reduction.
Does that mean that households are going to go backwards for 12 months?
No, I wouldn't refer it to as going backwards, because a lot of them are sitting on a lot of savings and they'll probably just use some of those savings.
The only outfit with the job of controlling inflation is the Reserve Bank, and the only tool they've got is lifting interest rates. But that does nothing about oil prices or supply chain disruptions. It just slows down demand, often by causing a recession. How high can inflation go, do you think?
It depends a lot on how long the crisis in Ukraine obviously lasts, because petrol prices are going to be a big part of that story. But I think we should brace ourselves and expect to see certainly inflation above 5% and probably edging up to 6%. Will it go as high as we expect to see, for example, in the US, where now they're forecasting over 10%? Probably not.
Professor Warwick McKibben sat on the RBA board during the GFC. He knows the delicate balancing act it's facing amid the new economic environment.
The worst thing a central bank can do in a supply shock or an oil crisis is to target inflation, because by targeting inflation you push downward pressure on the real economy to stop the other relative prices from rising. So you're trying to isolate the oil effect from the rest of the economy. That's a very bad monetary policy
Well,
response.
because you'd be causing a recession just because there's a problem getting supply.
That's right.
How likely do you think there's going to be an oil shock?
There is an oil shock. I mean, already there's an oil shock, but it's not just an oil shock. Between them, Ukraine and Russia produce about 30% of global wheat production. So we're seeing agricultural prices, food prices already rising, energy prices rising 30, 40%. But look forward, what are the key issues that are going to be facing the Australian economy over the next 20 years? It's not demand shocks coming from the 70s experience. It's climate change, it's oil shocks, it's a whole range of issues. One of the big ones actually is the amount of debt.
Professor McKibben is right. Australians have more household debt now than during any other time in history. In fact, we have some of the highest levels of debt in the world. That means the interest rate balloon won't have to go very high at all to bring the economy back to earth.
Hi, I'm Lee Sales. Thanks for watching this story. If you'd like to watch more of 730's stories, they are on the left of your screen. And tap on the button below to subscribe and get the latest from ABC News.